very good evening to all our viewers and welcome to a new edition of The Ambassador. Today we will be talking about the progressing relations between both Mexico and Egypt. We will be talking about the similarities and the differences in all walks of life. And of course, the best one to talk to us about these relations will be His Excellency Mr. Jorge Álvarez Fuentes, who is the Ambassador of Mexico to Egypt. Very good evening, sir.
Good evening, Jasmine. It's a pleasure to be with you and with your viewers.
Thank you, and it's my pleasure. Sir, first of all, I would like to talk in the beginning about your diplomatic career and studies and when you were appointed to be the Ambassador of Mexico to Egypt.
With great pleasure, Jasmine. I entered the Foreign Ministry in 1983, and I joined initially to work at the ministry at the Historical Division. I was coming initially from the Ministry of Interior. I was working at the National Archives. And I joined the Foreign Ministry that has a magnificent archive. And I wasn't at the time thinking of joining a diplomatic career, but it all started really with an invitation. In 1987, I was invited to go as first secretary to our embassy in Canada. And that's where I started my diplomatic career. I have served in Canada, I've served in New Zealand, I've served in Lebanon, and this is my fourth posting in Egypt. I have worked now for over 30 years in the ministry. I'm a career diplomat, but I'm not a traditional diplomat in the sense that I embrace a new diplomacy. I am particularly interested in the peoples-to-people diplomacy, the possibility of communicating, of engaging, of developing closer relations between
bridging
states,
the gaps between
bridging gaps, building
cultures.
on the relations between governments, but particularly working out with people. And that gives me the opportunity to mention that when I was invited to come as ambassador to Egypt, I knew very well that this was going to be an opportunity of a lifetime. I was already aware of what the developments that have taken place in recent years, because when myself and my family were in Egypt, we had the opportunity also to travel to Egypt. If you're in the Arab world, you have to come to Egypt.
Thank you.
Egypt is
our pleasure.
Egypt is the country that sets the trends in the Arab world, and it's the great Arab nation. So we came with our children, and we visited, and we went to many of the places that, of course, fascinate the world. And then I had the opportunity to follow closely on the developments which were taking place in Egypt. So when my minister proposed to me, I knew that I was going to come at historical times, and I feel very, very honored to be serving
It's our
Mexico.
pleasure. So, sir, I know that Mexicans and Egyptians are alike more than different. I would like to talk about the similarities between Egypt and Mexico, and also the differences.
Of course. Well, I think we should start by pointing out that we are two great countries. And I mean by great, countries that have a very profound and ancient history. Mexico and Egypt are two fundamental civilizations for mankind. The same way that people immediately correlate Egypt and Mexico through the pyramids, we have first to recognize that the two countries have really given humanity many of its values and many of its historical dimensions. So that is what I would say the profound context of two great nations. But secondly, we are also great nations because we are two countries which have big populations. Mexico is now almost 115 million Mexicans, and Egypt will soon be 90 million. It's almost a matter of a few months, I guess. And the dimensions geographically, demographically, cultural make us two countries that set really a lot of the dynamics in the region.
Even the people, they look alike.
We look alike, we have a lot of shared values. That means Egyptians are well known for their hospitality, their humbleness, their simple way of life.
Thank you.
And the same way that in Mexico, we feel very much at home with foreigners. We are also very welcoming. We have a lot of pride in our way of being part of the world. And I think in that sense, Mexico and Egypt have a lot of similarities.
I realized that when I came here.
Well, yes.
Thank you.
I think that anybody that comes across a Mexican in Egypt will find he or she extremely friendly, very open, very lively, with a joie de vivre which comes just naturally. And I think also what makes the two countries particularly close is that we have realized historically the importance of who we are. We are two proud countries that have had at the core of our nation-building process the concept of being proud of our identity. We are two countries that have very strong identities. And our identities have contributed enormously to how we have built our international relations.
Of course. And you have the Maya pyramids.
We have the Maya pyramids, we have the Aztec heritage, we have the Olmecs that predated the Spanish conquest. Because also one thing that is not that well known is that Mexico, as other Latin American countries, has an Arab heritage. And it's the Arab heritage that came through us, through Spain. We must remember that for 700 years, the Arabs dominated Spain. And just immediately after the Arab domination of Spain, the conquest of Mexico and the conquest of Peru and the conquest of Guatemala and many other regions in what is today Latin America took place. So the proof is in the language. In Spanish, more than 5,000 words come directly from Arabic. So when I talk about almohada or pantalón or alhaja or alberca, these are words that come directly from Arabic. But it's not only the language. It's also the architecture. It's also many of the ways that we have turned to be.
In all walks of life.
In all walks of life, in regards to our values, in regards to our food, in regards to how we enjoy life. When people talk to me about Cairo and Mexico City, of course they're very similar. They're two big cities. We're talking about some of the most magnificent cities full of history. You have here Islamic heritage. We have pre-Hispanic Aztec heritage. We talk about mosque and churches and magnificent buildings here from the Fatimid period. We also have incredible convents and churches dating from the 300 years of Spanish rule. So that historical dimension, the geography and the importance of geography. You are a large country in Africa, and you're part of the Arab world. The same way Mexico is a big country, and I mean big geographically. It's 2 million square kilometers. We are the only developing country that neighbors the only superpower, which is the United States of America. And that realities of geography, of demography, of history has made us very proud. So we can understand very well the psyche of Egyptians. And that has reflected in our bilateral relations.
We have so much in common, right? regarding the diplomatic relations between the two countries, I know that the first official diplomatic mission that Mexico had in Egypt was in Alexandria, I think,
yes.
in 1905. And the diplomatic relations between the two countries started in the 1950s.
Yes. In 1905, there was a growing interest in Mexico to what was happening, of course, with the building and the development of the Suez Canal. Mm-hmm. So Mexico opened a consulate in Alexandria in 1905. And we kept that representation, a consular representation, well into the 30s because of the economic activities, but mainly also to promote our interest in this part of the world, and particularly regarding the trade that took place, of course, through the Suez Canal. Mm-hmm. Then in the 1930s is that Mexico also went through a revolution. Mexico had a revolution between 1910 and 1920. And it took us some years to get fully acknowledged and recognized internationally. Mm-hmm. So when in the 1950s, Egypt came through a process, and Nasser came into history, and when the developments took place, particularly regarding Arab nationalism, Mexico followed other countries and established its embassy here in March of 1958. Mm-hmm. We opened an embassy in Cairo, and Egypt also opened an embassy in Mexico City at the very beginning of the 1960s. Mm-hmm. This house that we're here tonight, this residence is part of that story, because the second ambassador of Mexico to Egypt made very good friend. He was a very good and close friend of Emmanuel Mizrahi. Mm-hmm. He was one of the last pashas of Egypt, and he had built this house. And he was very close to Ambassador Castañeda, mm-hmm. who years later turned out to be the foreign minister. And since 1962, this has been the residence of the ambassador of Mexico. We feel very proud. We are very, very honored to live this house, this historical residence, which is also part.
Such a beautiful place here.
It's part of the heritage of,
mm-hmm.
of Egypt, and it's not only the house, as a lot of people and probably many of our viewers that know Madi will know that we have a beautiful garden, and we take good care of the garden, mm-hmm. and of the house. So the diplomatic relations have gone really from strength to strength. If we look into the 1960s, you see a lot of interest going around what was the emerging process in international relations. Mm-hmm. Mexico, as Egypt, was part of the non-aligned movement. Mexico and Egypt started sharing many of their views in the United Nations. In the 1970s, one of Mexico's president, Luis Echeverría, paid a state visit to Mexico as part of those efforts. And that is something that still today you find that a great number of Egyptian diplomats know well Mexican diplomats, because they have been together on the same positions, whether it be in New York or Geneva or in many capitals, because mm-hmm. a lot of the interests of both countries are similar. We're interested in a new world order. We're interested in promoting disarmament. We're interested in development. We're interested in environment. We're interested in human rights.
This adds to the similarities between the two countries.
So that has meant that over the years, high-level relations have been really the state of our links. You see a number of visitors, a number of high-level visits taking place almost on a regular basis. I'll give you a few examples. Mm-hmm. In 2006, our foreign minister came to Egypt and signed a memorandum of understanding with the Arab League. Mm-hmm. We signed this memorandum of understanding to promote the development of some projects in Egypt in particular, but also in the Arab world. So we established a fund in the Arab League, and we're very keen to make more progress out of this fund and to be able to work on very concrete projects. We are interested in projects that have to do with sustainable development, with water. We know how important water is for Egypt, the same way that it's important for us. We're particularly interested in projects that have to do with the sustainability in big cities. So we're working in such a way that visits that took place in 2006 are still bearing fruits today. Just last week, Minister El Arabi, the Minister of Planning and International Cooperation, paid a visit to Mexico. He attended an international conference, which is the Global Alliance for International Development Assistance. This is a high-level, was a high-level meeting that took place, and it was important for Egypt to be present there at this place and time. This was the opportunity to show many countries, because there were almost 138 countries present in this conference, to present what are the views and what is the stage that Egypt is going through. So Mexico has had, over its bilateral relations, this high caliber relations. We have had presidents coming from Mexico to Egypt, ministers from Egypt visiting Mexico almost on a permanent basis. We have now 15 agreements between the two countries. And they go from cultural cooperation to sister cities, to technical assistance, to investment.
Economic cooperation.
Economic cooperation. So we do have the framework to have these relations go even further. So I am convinced that the relations between the two countries have not only potential, but they have now very solid basis to move forward. And we will see that taking place more and more on different fronts. I'm glad to see that more Egyptians now know Spanish and are learning Spanish, because the Spanish that will be spoken throughout the world is going to be mainly the Spanish that is spoken in Mexico. We are the largest Spanish-speaking country in the world. And the second global language is Spanish. So the Egyptians are right. If you want to learn the foreign language, after English, learn Spanish. And we're working closely in that regard. We want more Egyptians to benefit from scholarships. I'm glad to see that more students from Mexico are coming to Egypt. Currently, there's still a few, but nonetheless, it's a good start. We have some students coming to Egypt to study, whether it be as it used to be in the 80s. In the 80s, it was very frequent that we had experts from Egypt going to Mexico for what? For training. For training in what? In wheat, in agriculture. The same way that diplomats were very close to each other, also experts in agriculture were very close between Mexico and Egypt. I want to see that happening again. I want to see more
the relations are strengthening time by time.
Yes, I think we have all the basis to have these relations grow more and more. I'll give you an example. I just came a few weeks ago back from Mexico, and I brought with me 15 books, all published in the last 2 or 3 years. One of this is this book, Contemporary Egypt, Economic, Politics, and Society. This is written by a Mexican academic, Juan Carlos Castañeda. This is the result of his visits to Egypt in 2004, 2009, 2010. And then when the revolution came in 2011, he finished the book and published. This is already going through its second edition.
So he ended the book with a very turning point in the
turning
Egyptian
point
history.
And he was very clear in his study that a lot of what was happening in Egypt had to do with economic and social realities in Egypt. So we looked in that with great interest, because that was also one of the dominant features in our bilateral relations. The issues about social justice. We are two developing countries. We still have huge challenges ahead of us. The biggest challenge for Mexico is to have 50% of its population. We're talking about more than 50 million Mexicans who are poor or extremely poor. How to bring them into development. How a country like Mexico, which is today's 14th economy, can stand strong if half of its population is still under the poverty line.
Okay, sir, excuse me, before talking about the economic situation in Mexico, I would like to shed the light on the non-aligned movement. You were a member of the non-aligned movement since its establishment, and then you left it in 1992, I think.
Correct.
I want to know the reason behind that.
Well, Mexico has developed its international relations based on a foreign policy that has principles even in the Constitution. And one of the principles, of course, is to promote our interest and develop a foreign policy that has been independent. While Mexico was part of the non-aligned movements and was also part of other international bodies, in 1992, Mexico took the decision to embark into two processes. On the one hand, we started negotiations to sign a free trade agreement with the United States of America.
In Cyprus, then you are entitled to apply to get permanent residence in Cyprus, the right to stay in Cyprus.
Other than the residency there, what kind of facilities are given to the investors? And I mean here,
as a country close to the non-aligned movement, we are a developing country that is very much interested in the issues about development, about New World Order, that has been at the core of the non-aligned movement. But we have decided also to advance our interest. Many of your viewers have heard about BRICS, these new grouping of countries that include Brazil and Russia and India and China and South Africa. But probably not many of your viewers have heard of MICTA. MICTA is a new This is a new group of countries, of 5 countries, which are Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey, and Australia. These are emerging economies which have decided to join and to be part of a process to influence many of the issues around the agenda, both the economic, international agenda, and the political agenda. But also the same has taken place in Latin America. In Latin America, new ways of organizing and of groupings of countries. Mexico is now part of what we call the Alliance of the Pacific, together with Chile, Colombia, Peru. And these are concrete examples of how Mexico has moved in that direction. But at the same time, we are a founding member of the United Nations, and we have had a lot of similarities. Let me tell you a little bit of the historical background, because I'm very conscious that one cannot understand anything in Egypt or in the Arab world if one doesn't understand and what doesn't approach history. In 1992, Dr. Boutros Ghali launched an initiative which was to hold a seminar to discuss what was going on in Latin America and what was going on in Egypt and in Africa. That seminar brought together Mexico and Egypt and Latin America and Africa for over 10 years. Over a period of 10 years, those seminars took place. So many academics, many experts, many diplomats shared that. And still today, these books, these new researchers, these new ways of understanding what is going today in the world is really at the core. Nowadays, you will not be surprised. At the core of our interest too happens to be energy. Energy is the issue that it's changing the geopolitical map of the world.
Same here in Egypt too.
The same case can said about Egypt. That if one sees into many of the hardships and the conflicts in the region have to do with energy. Mexico is going right now through a process of reforms. Mexico has had a transition, a political and economic and social transition. In the 1970s, when I started my studies at university, we were a country that was already a urban country, but we were less than 70 million. Today, we're 40 million bigger and really urban country. The majority of Mexicans, almost 8 out of 10, live in major cities. So that has also made of our international relations to be an international relations that has followed the times.
The non-aligned movement, the NAM, is a group of states which are not formally aligned with or against any major power bloc. As of 2012, the movement has 120 members and 17 observer countries. The organization was founded in Belgrade in 1961 and was largely conceived by India's first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, Indonesia's first President Sukarno, Egypt's second President Gamal Abdel Nasser, Ghana's first President Kwame Nkrumah, and Yugoslavia's President José Broz Tito. All 5 leaders were prominent advocates of a middle course of states in the developing world between the Western and the Eastern blocs in the Cold War. The phrase itself was first used to represent the doctrine by Indian diplomat V. K. Krishna Menon in 1953 at the United Nations. In a speech given during the Havana Declaration of 1979, Fidel Castro said that the purpose of the organization is to ensure the national independence, sovereignty, integrity and security of the non-aligned countries in the struggle against imperialism, colonization, racism and all forms of foreign aggression, occupation, domination, interference, as well as against great power and bloc politics. The countries of the non-aligned movement represent nearly 2/3 of the United Nations members and contain 55% of the world population. Membership is particularly concentrated in countries considered to be developing or part of the Third World. Members have at times included the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, Argentina, Namibia, Cyprus, and Malta. While many of the non-aligned movement's members are actually quite closely aligned with one or another of the superpowers, the movement still maintained cohesion throughout the Cold War. Some members were involved in serious conflicts with other members, such as India and Pakistan, Iran and Iraq. The movement fractured from their own internal contradictions when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1979. While the Soviet allies supported the invasion, other members of the movement, particularly Muslim states, condemned it. Because the non-aligned movement was formed as an attempt to thwart the Cold War, has struggled to find relevance since the Cold War ended. After the breakup of Yugoslavia, a founding member, its membership was suspended in 1992 at the regular ministerial meeting of the movement held in New York during the regular yearly session of the General Assembly of the United Nations. The successor states of the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia have expressed vital interest in membership, though some have observer status. In 2004, Malta and Cyprus ceased to be members and joined the European Union. Belarus remains the sole member of the movement in Europe. Azerbaijan and Fiji are the most recent entrants, joining in 2011. The applications of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Costa Rica were rejected in 1995 and 1998 respectively.
Sir, talking about the, you stated many times that Mexico supports the democratic transition here in Egypt. So tell me more about how do you view this democratic transition since the 25th of January revolution and the relations between both countries? Are there ups and downs between the relations since 2011, or it is strengthening?
I think we should see these in the perspective of what has taken place along the last 15 years. Mexico embarked in a process of a transition that meant coming out of a one ruling party to a political system of several political parties.
After 71 years.
Yes, 71 years of one ruling party ended in 2000 with the elections of Vicente Fox as president of Mexico. But as a matter of fact, 3 years later, those transformations had already started. In 1997, for the first time in Congress, in Parliament, the first time the PRI, which was the dominant political party in Mexico, didn't hold the majority of Congress at that year. And then there was other changes. Governors started to be elected in different states. Mexico is a federation of 32 states. So those changes went through a democratic electoral transition. Mexico found that the way to address its political development was by setting the rules. So other countries have embarked into constitutional reform. We have done electoral law reform. Of course, that has meant in some cases constitutional reforms. And we have established along these years that process. So when the so-called Arab Spring started, when developments took place in January 2011, Mexico followed very closely, and I mean closely not only as an observer, but as a friendly country to Egypt. We have very much in the core of our principles the self-determination of people. And we knew from the very beginning that the revolution in 2011 was the will of the Egyptian people. And we've seen that again in June of last year. We have followed closely and attentively. When I was appointed ambassador in April 2013, my credentials when I arrived here in June were addressed to a president who 13 days later was not anymore the president for the Egyptians. So we went through a process by which we clearly committed ourselves to support what's going on in Egypt. We understand that it's the will of the Egyptian people to give yourself a new way of governing yourself. You're building, I think at the core of Egypt is you are making your own history. And your own history today goes, of course, through building a democratic country, a more fair country, a more just country, where you have the opportunity also to give jobs, to give better education, to give better health to your people. And countries like Mexico share those values. So we have gone close by with your transition, and we will continue to do. One of the things that we've done is to share our experience in electoral reform. Only a month ago, there was a delegation of officers from Egypt that went to Mexico for a tailor-made seminar to address what does it mean to have elections, how to organize better elections, what does it mean electoral justice. So Mexico will be close to Egypt in its current transition, and we're convinced that you will achieve your big goals.
So, sir, the election of and the inauguration also of Vicente Fox in 2000 were the culmination of the slow transition to democracy in Mexico. I want to focus on this side, and I want to focus also on the transition to democracy. Here in Egypt, they are asking whether it will take many years to be a democratic country. People are busy-minded with the challenges taking place and everything, the mess taking place in the country. So out of your experience in Mexico, it takes a lot of years to be a democratic country?
I think it takes a process to arrive to the build-up of a democratic lifestyle. Democracy is a way of life. And Mexico had already started that. Even at the end of the 1980s, some initial attempts to introduce changes in the political system. And we found that the way of changing our political system was by changing our electoral system. When I was young and I first had the right to vote, we all knew who was going to win. Whoever was the candidate of the PRI was meant to be the winner. So that started changing by introducing new political parties. Some political parties had already been in Mexico since the end of the 1930s, but had never made it into power. So slight, small reforms started taking place. Now, the process means three things, in my view. On the one hand is the acknowledgement that this is a process in which everybody has a role to play. To be democratic means to be also in the disposition to come to an understanding. People, political parties, current movements might have different views about how to make this or that goal. But there has to be some fundamental goals and objectives. And I am certain that in the case of Egypt, as in many other countries, people are looking for a better life. They want their dignity reflected in better jobs, better education, better health system, and a better quality of life. And
the basic needs.
The basic needs, and also the need to be the owner of your own destiny, or building your own country, and deciding as a citizen which person, political party, or current can better represent those interests. So I think that the focus has to be pointed out not in the length of time, but on the quality of the process. And I think it's important that pluralism is set much more openly. How to build a system of political parties, how to allow different voices to build, of course, and to build on the values of state, which means the rule of law, which means stability, which means growth, which means the possibility of having a country that moves forward.
And of course, there are some challenges that have to be there.
Have to be there, of course. And those challenges have to be met with the support of the people. The people today have a way of making their views known, whether they come out in the millions to the streets or whether they express their views coming out through other means. Today we have the ability to communicate instantly. Today we have the ability to see in real time what's happening in our immediate surrounding or thousands of kilometers away from us. So I think in that regard, not only Mexico is a country which will be certainly of value for the process that Egypt is going through. In general, Latin America. Democratic transitions in Latin America are very relevant to what's going on in the Arab world. In countries in South America, they went into democracy after enduring military dictatorship, authoritarian regimes, one ruling parties. They, in many cases, have shown different ways. Somebody was mentioning cases where, you had political forces which even fought against the state, who would be considered today as terrorists. What about guerrilla fighters? Where do you draw the line between a freedom fighter and somebody who is out of the rule of law? So I think the process needs to be seen under that light. And I think people should not be patient only for the long run. They should be patient in what they have contributed every single day to make Egypt a more democratic country, a more fair country, a more transparent. One key element for democracy is the access to information. And the access of information means transparency and also accountability. When the citizens give power to elected representatives, whether it be in the presidency, whether it be in Congress, they have to be accountable. Accountable to who? To the people who have elected them, who are expecting, of course, from them to govern according to the rules, and I mean the Constitution. And you have now a new Constitution. You have set yourself, so Egyptians have to be more patient. You have to give yourself the opportunity to go through this process. With the speed of communication today, don't be anxious. This will take place in a shorter period of time than you think.
Just a few months ago, pending political reforms in Mexico were being hailed as the start of a new era in the country. But now that the powerful party of the Institutionalized Revolution, or the PRI as it is best known, has flexed the muscle, it looks as if the genuine political reform will have to wait quite a bit longer. The electoral reform, as approved in the Mexican Congress last week, restricts the formation of multi-party coalitions and access to the media and gives the PRI candidates the largest percentage of the public funds for the campaigns. That's unfair, worse, that is not what was agreed to over the last 18 months of hard negotiations conducted to arrive at reforms that would be satisfying for political parties in Mexico. The politics of Mexico take place in a framework of the Federal Presidential Representative Democratic Republic, whose government is based on the congressional system, whereby the President of Mexico is both head of state and head of government, and of a multi-party system. The federal government represents the United Mexican States and is divided into three branches: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, as established by the political constitution of the United Mexican States in 1917. The states of the Federation must also have a republican form of the government based on a congressional system, as established by the respective constitutions. The executive power is exercised by the executive branch, which is headed by the president, advised by a cabinet of secretaries that are independent of the legislature. Legislative powers is vested upon the Congress of the Union, a two-chamber legislature comprising the Senate and the Chamber of Deputies. The judicial power is exercised by the judiciary, consisting of the Supreme Court of Justice of the nation, the Council of the Federal Judiciary, and the Collegiate, Unitary, and District Tribunals. The politics of Mexico are dominated by three political parties: the National Action Party, the PAN, the Party of the Democratic Revolution, the PRD, and the Institutional Revolutionary Party, the PRI.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Jorge Álvarez Fuentes, the Ambassador of Mexico to Egypt. It was my pleasure, sir.
Thank you. Shukran.
Thank you. Our dear viewers, unfortunately we ran out of time, but still we have more to be said about the relations between both countries, Mexico and Egypt, in our next episode. Until then, goodbye.